Today, this is a well-known, popular, big Old Testament figure, and I was surprised we hadn't done him yet. But here we are for the first time in our story series covering Abraham. Father Abraham. Anyone grow up in church singing Father Abraham? Had many sons had. Okay, yeah. I won't sing, I don't want to mess that up. Father Abraham, a huge, prominent figure in the Old Testament, the father of the Jewish faith, you might say. Now, Old Testament, where we see Abraham, his story, this covers a lot of ground. It's Genesis chapters 12 all the way through 25. So that's a lot of chapters, and these are long chapters. So this is a long narrative story of Abraham. We are not covering all of that tonight. Amen? But I want us to cover some important things along the way. So we're going to look at a few different moments in his life and in his journeys. He takes these journeys. We're going to look at a few of these moments, and with each moment, there's an implication for us. A so what? This happened to Abraham a long time ago. What does this mean for me now? We're going to look at a few implications along the way, and then we're going to end today looking at a very peculiar, mysterious story involving Abraham that helps us see Jesus. And that's ultimately, as we do this series, we're going to talk about all sorts of different people, but we want to see them pointing to Jesus. That's what we're here to do together, follow Jesus together. So Abraham, he shows up in Genesis chapter 12. And so if we just zoom out a bit, if we look at Genesis 1 through 11, we did a whole series on this, if you can remember, called The Prehistoric God. And these are some of the big picture stories of creation, of Adam and Eve, of Cain and Abel in the garden, of the flood with Noah, all these things, the Tower of Babel, Genesis 1 through 11. And then God makes a turn and zooms into the story to partner with a specific individual, and this is Abraham. In Genesis 3, he would promise Eve that one day the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. Something fulfilled in Jesus, by the way. That one day the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. The first picture of Jesus, all the way back in Genesis 3. This zooming in on Abraham really picks up and continues on that story because it is the family of Abraham that leads us all the way to Jesus. And you can trace his lineage of Jesus all the way back to Abraham. And in fact, Matthew in his gospel gives us that genealogy. So let's beat Abraham together. You've probably heard of him, but let's look at some of these stories and what they mean for us. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and to him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." If you've been around Meadows Church for a little time, you've probably heard me reference this verse. Because the important thing here is that God is blessing Abraham, but he says an important thing: I'm going to bless you and your family so that you and your family can be a blessing to others. I'm not just blessing you for blessing's sake so that you can be great and we're awesome here, but I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing to the others, the other nations, the other peoples. I want to bless you in this way because this is an idea, if we're honest and look through the scriptures, it gets forgotten. The people eventually, the Jewish people, the Israelites throughout the Old Testament think, okay, God is blessing us, so he's with us and he's for us and he's our God and he's not their God and he's ours and it's us against them. That's the idea that ends up coming out throughout the scriptures, but we must not lose sight of this original promise from Abraham to God. I will bless you, or from God to Abraham, I will bless you so that you can be a blessing to the others. Hold on to that. Now, you might have heard it said Abram. Anyone catch that? Not Abraham. Abram's name would be changed to Abraham. We're going to cover that in a moment. So just so you know, for clarity's sake today, I'm going to be saying Abraham. A lot of the story, he's Abram. But we're going to be saying Abraham because that's how we know him. Are you okay with that? Abraham is what I'm going to say. His wife, Sarai, her name would be changed to Sarah. So I'm going to probably say Abraham and Sarah more often as I tell the story. We'll get to the name change as it comes. Now, what's important about Abraham as we meet him? He's from a place called Ur. You are Ur. Anyone have a funny sounding town you grew up in? It's probably not any worse than Ur. He grows up in Ur of the Chaldees, Ur of the Chaldeans. This is a group of people that we might call pagan, that worships not Yahweh, but other foreign gods in the Old Testament scriptures. Connected with Babylon and Mesopotamia. This is Ur of the Chaldees, 1,000 miles east of the promised land, of where Jerusalem would eventually be. This is all the way over, I'm facing this way, this is all the way over this way from the promised land. And they worship gods like Marduk, Gebel. They don't worship Yahweh. So here's what's interesting about Abraham. He's called by God as an older man, and it's this God that he does not know. He didn't grow up going to church. Let me give you a hint. Abraham was not a Christian. He didn't grow up a Christian, which you might say, of course, he was in the Old Testament. But he didn't grow up Jewish either. That didn't really exist yet. There was no book. There was no law. There was no code. There was no plan. There was no nothing. But Abraham heard a voice from God that says, go. You might call Abraham a pretty interesting guy, maybe even a weird guy, that he's a mystic and hears God speak to him. Maybe you have people in your life that will tell you God speaks to them. Be cautious, but also lean in and ask them what God is saying. I believe God speaks to us still, and he speaks to Abraham, and Abraham responds in great faith, by the way. In the New Testament, it would say Abraham's faith was counted to him as righteousness. He had great faith, and he trusted this God that he did not know, that he did not grow up worshiping, that he was unfamiliar with, but he went. And the most amazing thing about that moment is that God doesn't even tell him where he's going yet. He says, go to the land that I will show you. And so Abraham's journey takes him from Ur, the Chaldees, up over to Haran, down into the land of Canaan, down further into Egypt. He has a long journey, does Abraham, where he's a nomad, a traveler, a visitor for much of his life. But he trusts God. So what is the implication for us here today? Maybe this is you or someone that you know. You grew up not in church, not following Jesus, not in this Christian bubble, not understanding or experiencing all these Christian things, but here you are today and you're going, okay, I didn't grow up familiar with all this, but perhaps God is calling me as I move forward to say, I'm going to be a person and my family is going to be a family that follows Jesus. It doesn't have to be something you grew up with. You don't have to have all the answers and know all the things. You don't have to have perfect attendance at church from ages 2 to ages 12. You don't have to have all those things. Abraham didn't have any of that, and he can look back over his ancestry and go, yeah, we weren't following Yahweh. We didn't know about Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament. We didn't know about him, but then Abraham encountered God, and it changed everything. And I pray for you an encounter with God where you say, okay, this is the moment that changes not just my life, but my family's life and our ancestors as we go forward. You might look back and say, well, we didn't follow Jesus then. We didn't go to church then, but now we are. Now we can, and you can make that decision. Your life can be the catalyst that changes the future of your family. And there's so many great stories that could even be shared in this room of that moment that happened in your family at some point in a past time that has impacted you. A praying mother or a grandmother or a great-grandmother that said, we are going to be a family that goes to church, that follows Jesus. This is who we're going to be. And you are impacted by that. But maybe for you or someone that you know that's close to you, you get to be that person that says, no longer are we going to be here. No longer are we doing things this way. We're going to change and trust and follow after God. Implication number 1. Now, as I said, Abraham's travels led him to Egypt. He would go from Ur to Haran to Canaan to Egypt and then back up into Canaan, the promised land. It was a long journey. And part of that journey took him to the land of Egypt. In fact, it was a famine in the land that led him to Egypt. That's a theme that would be repeated again, by the way, in the scriptures. And I want us to see what Abraham does when he goes to Egypt for the first time. This is in Genesis chapter 12, verses 11 through 13. When he, Abraham, was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are a beautiful woman in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is my wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. Okay, so Abraham and his wife Sarah, so still Abram and Sarai, if you're keeping track. head down into the land of Egypt. Before they get there, Abraham notices something that he's probably noticed before. His wife is a beautiful woman. And he says, when we go to Egypt, they're going to take you and they're going to kill me to get rid of me because I'm no benefit to them, but they're going to keep you for certain reasons, as you might imagine, of why they would want to keep this beautiful woman. So he says, how about you just say that you're my sister? We're just brother and sister. That way they're not going to kill me as a threat, as competition, but we'll just be all together. So when they arrive into Egypt, Sarai, is taken into Pharaoh's house. Now, I'm not going to go into all the detail of what goes on in the house, but I want you to imagine what goes on in the house with the beautiful woman that they take into Pharaoh's house and what Abraham is thinking in this moment. The reason that I put this in the story is because this is when Abraham makes a dumb decision. He sins. He messes up. He says, I'm going to put you, my wife, in harm's way so that I can be out of harm's way. We're going to lie to the people of Egypt and tell them you're my sister when actually you're my wife so that they can have their way with you. They won't bother me because I'm only your brother. This is kind of a dark part of the story where he lies to the Egyptians. Eventually he is found out and luckily his life is spared, but this is a moment when Abraham makes a bonehead decision and does the wrong thing. And so what is the implication for us today? You might be able to guess this one. We also make dumb decisions. Can I get an amen there? It's not just me. When we have given our lives to follow Jesus, some of you have done that. Some of you are still praying through what it means to give your life to Jesus, to follow after Jesus. But when we say, I want to follow Jesus, I want to go this direction, you are still, I promise you, going to sin. You're still going to screw up. You're still going to do dumb things, sometimes accidentally and sometimes on purpose. You are going to mess up over and over again. And the challenge comes when you mess up and you're following Jesus. Some people want to say, well, I screwed up, so I might as well let that stuff go. And I'm just going to go back to my old ways. I'm going to go back to my old life. There can't be forgiveness for me now. I'm following Jesus, and then I screwed up and I sinned again, and I messed up again, and I went back to this thing I didn't want to do again. I did these things. Now I can't receive forgiveness. We feel this. We feel shame, and we give up on the journey. God continues to use Abraham after this decision. And guess what Abraham would do again? He would mess up again. He would sin again. He would do the wrong thing again, just like I do, just like you do. And the hope for us is that as we follow Jesus and we slip up and fall down, as we do dumb things, as we sin, as we go the wrong direction, that we know that grace and forgiveness is there, greater than all of our sin. God's grace is greater than all of our mess up, all of our sin, all of our struggles. Forgiveness is there. I've had this conversation before with people that are waiting to be baptized. Maybe you've had this thought before. They said, I'm ready to be baptized. And then there's this moment of where they hesitate and they pull back and they say, well, I don't know if I'm ready yet. And they're waiting for this righteous moment. I got to get a little bit better. I got to sin a little less. I got to cuss a little less. I got to do this a little, whatever the thing is. And they're waiting for this kind of step in righteousness of their own good deeds to say, okay, now I'm ready to be baptized. And every time I have to tell them that's not what baptism is about. We never achieve this place of righteousness where we earn baptism, where we earn salvation, where we earn God's favor. It's not of anything that we do that's our good works. It's God's grace. It's a gift. It's His mercy for us. If you want to follow Jesus, then you're ready to be baptized. And maybe that's something that some of you have been wrestling with. You say, man, I do want to follow Jesus. I think I should probably be baptized, but I don't know if I'm good enough yet. I still mess up. I still sin. Yes, you are going to. And the church, we get to walk alongside. And so we're going to sin with you. We're going to try to stop you from sinning. And then we're going to ask you to help stop us from sinning too, as we walk and try to follow Jesus together. Abraham messed up here. And we are going to mess up too. Don't let it stop you. God still used Abraham in a great way, big way. Keep following after Jesus. As the story continues, like I said, we got all the ground to cover, but as the story continues, God establishes a covenant with Abraham. This is a big part of his life. This covenant God enters into with Abraham. We're in fact going to end with that peculiar story. But one of the things I want to say is that he tells Abraham that he's going to be the father of a multitude of nations, that his descendants will outnumber the stars of the heavens. This is how the conversation goes. Genesis chapter 17, verses 5 and 6. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be called Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. This is part of the covenant that God would make with Abraham as he changes his name. Here's what is the most fascinating thing for me about this moment. When God changes his name from Abram to Abraham, he is 99 years old. He was 99 years old. Is anyone 99 in the room? We're all looking ahead towards 99. Abram was Abram for 99 years, and yet none of us know him because he was Abram. We know him as Abraham. He's referenced later as Abraham. He's mentioned in the New Testament as Abraham. We've heard of him and sang the song as Abraham, and that didn't happen until he was 99 years old. Very similarly, Moses, as we've talked about before, did not encounter God in the burning bush until he was 80 years old. 40 years he spent in Egypt, and then 40 years in the land of Midian, and then he finally encounters God in the burning bush, and his life has changed, and he goes on mission, and that's the reason that we've heard of Moses at all. 80 years old, 99 years old. So here's what I want to say to you today, an implication. The greatest thing that you may ever do in your life is likely ahead of you. It might just be in front of you. God is not done using you because you are 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or 80. He's not done using you because you think you've gone past these young years when you thought everything was so important and you knew your whole life ahead of you. There's more to come, and Abraham wasn't Abraham until he was 99. Your legacy, your moment, the thing that you are remembered for, hopefully because of Jesus, but the thing you are remembered for might be something for you that's in the future. Something that you do, something that you say, a place that you go, a person that you impact might be in the future. Some of us get so pulled into the monotony of everyday life, and we start to get bored with our life. We maybe get married, we maybe have kids, we go to bed, we watch a TV show, we wake up, we repeat, and life just flashes by. And I want us to be challenged with the idea that God has something spectacular, miraculous for you to accomplish. And you get to walk and find that out. And hopefully the church comes alongside and help point you to that thing, whatever it may be. Maybe it's the kids that you raise. Maybe it's the neighbors that you impact. Maybe it's the job that you have or the spouse that you love. It's the places that you go. I don't know what that thing is for you, but I want us to get out of the rut of monotony and say, God, what is the spectacular, miraculous thing you have for me in my life that I might step into it? And it might be something that's way in the future. May I continue to walk that direction. Abram becomes Abraham at 99 years old. Fascinating. Now, part of Abraham's life has to do with children. Of course, this is Father Abraham. God tells him he's going to have a family. This family will grow, be immense, will outnumber the stars of the heavens. God tells him these things. And then Abraham is sitting there as an old man, and his wife, who's also old, is barren. And he's thinking probably the same thing you're thinking. God, how is this going to work? I'm going to be the father of a multitude of nations, but I'm old and my wife's barren and we don't have any kids. So are you sure that you got the right guy, God? Have you ever felt that? Are you sure that you got the right person? I'm not worthy, or I'm not fit, or I'm not right. It can't be me. This is what Abraham's thinking. And so Abraham and his wife make a decision. Again, a wrong decision. They decide to take things into their own hands. They take matters into their own hands. They say, well, Abraham, you're old. Sarah's barren. And so how can we have a kid? And so they come up with this plan. And Sarah says, well, I have this slave woman, this Egyptian woman named Hagar. Abraham, why don't you get together with her, lay with her in the biblical sense, and you can have a child that way. And so they do that. Now you can imagine the loving relationship then between Sarah and Hagar. Right? This is something you'd see on the Jerry Springer Show, if you're old enough to know what the Jerry Springer Show is. And just like we might think of it as now, there was tension between them as soon as this happened. This was Sarah's idea. Let's do this. Then Abraham does it. And she's like, why'd you do that? Abraham has a son. His name is Ishmael from Hagar. Now, Hagar has her own beautiful story as she meets and encounters God. But Abraham makes the wrong decision because he decides he's going to take the promise that God had given him, and he doesn't see how God is going to accomplish it God's way, so he will just take care of it himself. So for us, our implication, there's times when God may promise you something, may speak something to you, may say, this is going to come from you, and you're waiting and you're wondering, and how's it going to work? So you're going to say, well, I'll just do it myself, God. I don't really need you, God. I've shared this before about the church. I don't want the church to do anything outside of the will and the power and the Spirit of God. I can have a great plan. You can have great plans. We can do great things. We can have good strategy. But if it's any apart from God, I don't want it. I'm not interested in it. I don't want to try to do things with my own strength of my own plan. I don't want to take this into my own hands. I want to trust that God is going to do what God said he's going to do. And God will do it. Now, time goes on. Time moves forward as it does. And then Abraham has this encounter with God. Let's read about it. Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. How are we doing? All right, we're doing good. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door, to meet them, and bowed himself to the earth, and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Now this is a mysterious passage, because God, the Lord, it says, comes to meet with Abraham. He's there in the heat of the day in the door of his tent. Again, he was a nomad, a traveler, a visitor. He wasn't a man with a big established house in a nice neighborhood. He was in his tent by the oaks of Mamre. And God appears to him. And the story is interesting because it's the Lord, and then Abraham runs out to greet the Lord, but then it's 3 men. And then Abraham talks to them and says, O Lord. So this is God appearing to Abraham in the form of 3 strangers. I have a picture I want you to see. This is an old icon. This is a Rublev, if you keep up with icons, called the Trinity, also called the Hospitality of Abraham. It's from the year 1411. The Trinity. These 3 strangers that meet with Abraham are none other than, what many theologians think, is the Trinity. God the Father and the Son and the Spirit appears on earth in the form of these 3 strangers. It is the Lord, then it is the 3 strangers, then it is the Lord. This is how the story is told. And Abraham greets them and bows to them and serves them, eventually serving them communion, a foreshadowing of another event to come. These 3 strangers visit and they tell Abraham, the Lord tells them, that you are going to have a son. Now what's cool about this is Sarai is in the background. She overhears what the Lord says, and how does she respond? She laughs. It's okay to laugh in church sometimes. It's okay to laugh when God says something because your faith is just not big enough to comprehend how God is going to do something. And she is in the background, and the Lord says you're going to have a son, and she laughs. And of course, 9 months later, here comes Isaac, Abraham's son Isaac. And Isaac, Yitzhak, that name, means laughter. Isaac means laughter. Isaac is born. Isaac comes as this promise, this fulfillment. Now here's what's important for us to consider. God told Abraham that he would be the father of a multitude of nations. What Abraham actually saw was Isaac. Abraham, your descendants, your family is going to outnumber the stars of the heavens. And what Abraham saw was not that. What he saw was Isaac. I believe the Lord has things for us. He promises things to us. He may call you to something great and send you on a mission to do something wonderful, but you may only see the very beginning of that moment. I feel this about Meadows Church. My wife and I moved out here across the country 5 years ago to start Meadows Church with the promise and belief that God was with us, that he was going to fulfill this dream to start the church, to bless it, and to be a beacon of light in this community to point people to Jesus. Now, I don't know if the future leads Meadows Church to a 500, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people. I don't know what that is. But what I know for me is that I am called to be faithful in my chapter. I'm not going to be in all the chapters. I'm going to be faithful in my one chapter. And I see this right here. And I love this right here. And I want to love and serve and be there and point to Jesus and bear witness to his goodness with the people that he's brought into my life. And I want to do things the right way. And I want to be a church that does things the right way, that points people to Jesus. And all I get to do, all I get to be responsible for, all I'm going to see is my chapter in a much greater book. We all have things like that. And God may be promising you something great, but it's not going to be for you to walk through and enjoy. You are only going to get to take the step of faith that you get to take in your life, in your moment. And you will get to see that moment and that chapter. And I pray all of us would be faithful in that moment, that chapter that we have, knowing that there's more to come and that you and I, are not in charge of that. That's where we put our faith and trust that God will do something great. I didn't plan to talk about this, but Jessalyn mentioned her dad earlier, and I can just imagine all that he hasn't got to see since he passed away. But the family that's grown, that's tripled, all the kids that have now grown up and had their own kids, and this family that's grown, that loves Jesus, that's all around the country serving Jesus and ministering to people in churches, he didn't get to see all that. He prayed for it. He believed in it. He didn't get to see all that. But he was faithful. He was so faithful in his chapter. And at some point, just like him, all of our chapters will come to an end. Just Miss Tanya's chapter came to an end today. But her impact in the story is not over. Bruce's impact in the story is not over. When I die, I hope my impact in the story is not over. Abraham had Isaac, and then Isaac would have Jacob, and Jacob the 12 sons, and Joseph leading to Moses and Joshua and David and Solomon, all the rest unto Jesus, who would bless the entire world. It begins with Abraham being faithful in his moment, his chapter. This is what God calls us to do. Be faithful in your moment. Don't try to fulfill all of that. It's not for you to do. Abraham saw Isaac. That's what he saw. He didn't see the multitudes. He saw Isaac. Isaac. Abraham and Isaac is an interesting story, if you're familiar with the scriptures. He prayed for a son. He received this miracle son as a gift from God, Isaac, and then something peculiar would happen. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 and 2. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. You know, people have throughout history struggled with this story. And this could be a whole sermon on just this story, but we're going to touch it just for a brief moment. Abraham prayed for a son. He believed God for a son. And God provided this miracle son. And then God tells Abraham to go sacrifice his son, to kill his son, is what he's saying. Now, the truth of this story that I want to offer to you, a way to think about it. Abraham was not unfamiliar with child sacrifice. He grew up in Ur of the Chaldees that worshiped Molech, that worshiped Marduk, that worshiped these other false gods who required child sacrifice. It was a part of their religious system. As a child, Abraham would have heard screams down the road of children being offered to pagan deities. He was familiar. He knew the custom. He knew the tradition. He knew the plans that these other gods had required. Abraham was familiar. And then when he finally gets his son, who's following now this new God that he's still learning about, he believes with all his heart that he's supposed to offer unto God his son, and so he follows through with this story. But here's what I want to suggest today. I believe the most clear moment of this story, the most clear voice of God in this story, is not when he tells him to sacrifice his son, but when he tells him to stop. That is the point of the story. He would take his son to the land of Moriah. He would climb the mountain. He would be ready to sacrifice him, and God says, Stop! The angel of the Lord, Jesus. That was a sermon for another time we've talked about. It says, Stop. Wait! Abraham stops. Isn't this what I'm supposed to do? That's what all the other gods require. Not so with this new God. Not so with Yahweh. Not so with the Father of Jesus. Stop, he says, and he provides a ram caught in the thickets on the side. And the ram substitutes himself, and the ram becomes the sacrifice instead of the son. And Abraham is now known throughout all the world as the father of monotheism and also of the end of child sacrifice. Because God says, stop. Yahweh did not require the death of Isaac. He trusted God, and he provided a sacrifice. A sacrifice. This brings us to our last story. As I said, a peculiar story that helps us point and understand Jesus a little bit better. Let me read the first part of the story from Genesis chapter 15. Verses 7 through 11, it says this. And he, God, said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And he said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, and a female goat 3 years old, and a ram 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in half. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. This is one of those interesting stories in the Bible that you read through and you're kind of trying to figure out what the heck is going on. This is the story of Abraham entering into a covenant with God. And God says, bring me these animals, these 3 animals, and he cuts them in half and you lay them on either side. Here's the context of the story. In the ancient Near East, they had blood covenants. You would enter into a covenant. 2 people would come together in a covenant. It was called a blood covenant. Nowadays, we can have a piece of paper and print it out nicely, and I sign here and you sign here, and there we go. Not so in the ancient Near East. They have a blood covenant, and they would cut these animals in half. I know it sounds bizarre, but it's what they did. They would cut them in half, they would lay them on either side, and then you would come together, the 2 parties come together, and they would walk through the animals, cut in half. And they would walk through them to say this, I'm walking through these animals, and if I break my end of the covenant, may I be like these dead animals with my blood on the ground, and curse be upon me. That's what the blood covenant was about. We are coming together, me and the other party, agreeing to do this, and we walk through this blood oath, if you will, and I'm going to walk through these animals, and if I were to break my end of the covenant, may I be cursed and my blood spilled on the ground. And this is the covenant that enters into between Abraham and God. But let's see what happens. There's a difference. Verse 12. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. And behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Verse 17. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. A blood covenant would be 2 parties walking together, and if either were to break their end of the bargain, if either were to go against the agreement upon, they would walk through, and if they were to break their end, may they die, may they receive the curse, may their blood be spilled. When it was time for that to take place, God comes down and he puts Abraham in a deep sleep, and Abraham goes to sleep. And then God, in the form of a smoking fire pot and flaming torch, this is a cool story. God comes down onto the earth, and God himself, and God alone, passes between the pieces. And this is what God says. I am going to walk through this blood covenant myself, and I will take upon myself both parties' promise. And if I break the covenant, may blood be upon my head. And if Abraham or his people or his family, if they break the covenant, may the curse not be upon them, God says, but the curse is going to be upon me. I am walking through for both of us. I swear by my own name, the New Testament would say. God walks through as both parties. And if either one is liable, it is upon God. If he breaks the covenant, may he be killed. If Abraham breaks the covenant, it's back onto God. This is the covenant God enters into with Abraham. And throughout the rest of the Old Testament story, the people, Abraham's descendants, would break the covenant over and over and over again. Idolatry and injustice. And God would deal harshly with them at times. And they would go into exile, and they would be conquered, and they would have their city destroyed. But God would remain faithful to them because God swore upon himself that he would. And this is what leads us all the way to Jesus. You can ask the question, why did Jesus have to die? You could have a long discussion about that. There's many different answers for that question. Many different things that the death of Jesus did accomplish, and we can sit and talk for a long time about atonement theories and blood theology, and I'd be happy to have that discussion. But one of the primary reasons Jesus died is because Jesus is God, and Jesus passed through those pieces, and Jesus swore upon himself as God that if we break the covenant, that he would take the death upon himself. And Jesus takes the death upon himself. Not because he earned it. Not because he broke his end of the bargain. Not because he broke the covenant, but because we did. And so Jesus takes our curse upon himself and dies upon the cross, and his blood is shed onto the ground, and he fulfills the covenant. The blood of Christ seals the covenant, and he takes upon himself the shame that was due us, the penalty that was due to us, the death that was due to us. And it's because he chose to do it. He loves us that much. He wants to partner with us that much. He wants to walk with us that much. And it starts all the way back with this covenant in Genesis 15 with Abraham. And Jesus sheds his blood because he loves us so very much. So for you today, I want you to follow Jesus. That's what I want for you. I want you to say, I don't know what's going on here behind, but I want to step this way, and I want to say, I'm going to follow Jesus. Jesus died on the cross for my sins, for your sins, for my shame and for your shame, to take upon the consequences of this breaking of the covenant upon himself. And I want to follow after him. And I want him to change my life, and he will. And the beautiful thing is that we get to all do this together. Following Jesus together is the vision of our church. You're not called to do it by yourself. You're not supposed to. That wasn't Jesus' plan either. He established the church and commissioned us to go and make disciples. And we are to do that still.